Hey everybody, it's Petey from the Spinner Rack, and we also have
Calvin Ellis, ready to rock.
today. Now, this is not going to be totally going at the Comics Gate or people that have been in that sort of thing, but from time to time, I listen to Ethan Skyver's videos, and sometimes I listen to your boy Zach's videos on Comics Matter with your boy Zach, and you know, besides some of his comic critiques, I don't I don't fault him as far as doing his own comic books. But I ran into something that I don't have the video right in front of me, but I'm gonna go to his site so you can see it. Here it goes. This is Comics Matter, right? He does his own comic books, which are Jawbreaker. All these what's those things? Kickstarter and Indiegogo comic books, which seem to be very successful for him. But I ran into a big roadblock. One of these videos, I'm not sure which one, so I can't play him saying that. So ultimately, you're gonna have to believe me right now. He said, "Do you know why?" I'm asking you to this, Cal. You know why comic book pros are so awkward at the cons, and why they act that way, and why they don't want to always be friendly to the fans? You wanna know why?
Here's why.
Why is because you know how easy it is to write a comic book? It's so easy that they know it. So they don't want people in on how easy it is to write a comic book. And I was like, I understand that a lot of comic book guys are introvert. It's not to say because obviously it was like comic books was huge in Brooklyn. Like even the Hard Rocks would have comic books. So it was like I saw Wolverine Alone when I was in the school park, and one of the dudes who was reading it, you couldn't you could get hit in the face. So ultimately, do you feel that writing a comic book is just way easier? It's not writing a novel. It's not writing a movie. Do you feel that it's that
I,
easy, and this is why the comic book pros can act like a-holes because they know they got a good thing going and they don't want other people to figure it out.
I, I, I think the same people who believe that writing a comic book is easy are the same people who are critics of film and think that their analysis is also is also the be all end all. Writing in and of itself is not easy. The average person doesn't write well, period. That's just high school writing essays. And then when you get into creative writing where you're able to hit all the necessary notes and still make this something that people are willing to suspend disbelief with, a term most people don't even probably know if they ever did. It's not easy. It's just not. So, but again, we're in 2023. We have a megaphone for opinion, misinformation, you name it. So hey, why not put this out there? It's not like they've ever written anything and sold it. So but why not go for it? We can just go with the whole postmodern bent that as long as it's meaningful to me, it must mean something.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I feel that one of the things I realize is that in my mind, right? Obviously, I would see like just comparing like Frank Miller's Daredevil, and I can include Born Again with it. This is a little, I mean, you can see a difference, but it's still Frank Miller. And I compare that to Ann Nocenti, who took over Daredevil after Miller, and her approach was almost like how things are descriptive in the novel, right? So, and she had kind of novel type of things in her style, which was different. That brought forth something of saying, "Hey, this is pretty involved type of thing," like saying, "I don't think that anyone's going to think of her as Alan Moore." But I'm saying this is an involved type of writing, so obviously, and she's, coming at it as sort of a novel approach, very descriptive of different things, different angles, some psychology on certain characters, that sort of stuff. So it's like there was, but it was different from Miller, where Miller was in some in his head, but it was very action, very the noir type aspect type of deal, and but in looking at it, you could see when the Image guys took to writing, it was something that was lost, and in my opinion, they weren't people who were like avid readers. Where the comic guys, you could give Perez or Byrne or Walter Simonson, like those three alone are big sci-fi guys. And you got Miller, who's a big noir reader, and it translates. And the same with writers; they're big readers. So obviously, that translates to being able to writing or going like they say it was this guy Stephen Barnes. He was like saying if you want to write, films, read novels, like try to read something that's a little more involved to do the next thing. So if you're going to do comics, you read pulps, and then that or read novels type of thing, and you keep but just a basic thing to give you a little bit, a tiny other thing to go by, but at the same time, you're not leaving yourself just trying to do action, villain, this like or this instance of say like The Simpsons, where they would start a story with some premise that would just lead to the next thing. It wouldn't be that portion of the story that's ended and it's the springboard to the next part, and then you get to the climax into resolution. And I think it's
It involves the sophistication of writing that these guys are not. It's like I look at the Image stuff, and these were guys who read comics at the very least. And most of the comic writers had, I mean, you look at even at the stuff that you would read, and you could tell what Stan Lee had read just by the titles. And he'd be like, "Lo, the Silver Surfeth cometh." Okay, you could just tell by the title that he's probably read the Iceman cometh, or a whole bunch of Shakespeare, this type of stuff, and was probably still reading these things. And while he wasn't necessarily trying to do Shakespeare with the comic, the influence is definitely there. You mentioned Ann Nocenti, and I think you got to give Ann Nocenti a lot of credit because her Daredevil run was chock full of a whole bunch of stuff that was just like, what the hell is this? Some feminist screed here, and then some stuff about how animals, are being mistreated, and Daredevil going on a trek. Like it looked like he was going on a trek upstate New York and on a farm and fighting Ultron, and the sales never plummeted. Guys were still reading it at the end of the. I know I was one of them. I was still like some of this stuff is weird, but there was still enough of the superhero stuff to go along with it that you tolerated some of it. Said, well, maybe I'm not too much interested in this, but there was still enough superhero stuff, 70-30, at the end, 75-25 that was delivered that the rest of the stuff was tolerable. Okay, she never lost sight of that overall. And then when she ended her run, you had classic Daredevil again with some of the stuff. Oh, some of the images, I just remember how they were executed. It was like, okay, great. And she left it. She left the story in a place where the next guy could still pick it up. She didn't leave him out there, fight, over here like trying to save cows or something of that nature, or being a farmer. She brought him back to New York and left them in a position where somebody else could pick up the character, get him back going again. And they were still pretty much under the the auspices, if you will, of what Frank Miller had done on the Born Again run. Mm-hmm. But her run was, again, that's something that they should show people like, hey, this is how you do it. You want to do this other type of stuff and get it in there? No problem. These guys will tolerate it if, okay, you can get the superhero stuff right. So that's one of the things I think really, that would be writing 101. But I mean, why do it now? Guys keep voting with their money that they're not really interested in the stories. And then every once in a while, you have something like Immortal Hulk, and that took off strictly on the stories alone. By the time guys caught on to that, like issue, I forget what issue it was, but the other ones were so low printed because it had just started. Guys were going crazy for it. Then it becomes all the spec, but it was the story that drove that one, not the cover art, not the first appearances. It was the story that drove it at the end of the day. But I think that's half reader and half writer. And if the writers think that they can get away with some blancmange, and the readers will go for it as long as they have some nice sequences and such, and that's what the guys are willing to pay for, no problem. Or worse, they're speculating on it, no problem. That's what they're going to deliver. But I mean, even competent storytelling, that takes somebody who actually wants to tell a competent story. And the more you do competent stories, the better you're going to get at it, and you'll be able to make the leap to some really, good classic storytelling. At least one. I think every good writer has at least one classic storyline in them. But as long as you can just doing the hack work, why should you do anything else? Especially if the readership is saying, "Hey, we're willing to buy it."
Well, I think that's because I didn't want to turn it into trying to find. Well, I did look up after he said that. I did look up a couple of Richard Meyer, your boy Zach's books, and I was just like, I don't know, man. But I didn't want to turn it into us just picking it apart and saying what good writing was not. But one of the things that I think it's just important to not, if that was the case, the readers wouldn't have not taken to um, like Jack Kirby's dialogue, right? They wouldn't have been flipping out because ultimately he was just too old school. He'd written comic books in the 40s and 50s with Joe Simon. Obviously, he knew story because he was a heavy part of the stuff with Stan Lee in the Marvel books, but the writing itself during the which Roy Thomas always says, which was a nicer way to put it, was saying it's a little more poetic how he was writing, and that's how kind of Jack kind of talks. So you could see people talk about how Jack Kirby talked, but at the same time, as a writer, it wasn't that easy to translate because ultimately you also had to struggle with Stan Lee had created this cool style of dialogue, and in comparison to that, the new in the what was it? I think it's at the comic book greats. They pointed out the New Gods had this like Victorian type of thing to the dialogue and the dynamics, but it's hard to compete when the people in New York City they are kind of written in a way that didn't necessarily feel same or true to the readers of the time. So it's one of the things I think trying to look at it as a pro, and I know, well, like, let me pause it for a second. I'm going to where I think, what was it? One of the things that, I think you might have gone further with trying to do your own comic books than I did, but,
It's still going.
but it's one of the things that I found in working with one of our friends is that I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to be rejected by our friend. Like I was coming up with a plot, and I was just like, I had this idea when I pitched it to him. Now when I put it on paper, will it hold up? And then we got past that part. But then at the same time, when he sent me back pages, it was also something where it's like I gotta make sure I was just writing it, and I was just like, oh, it was daunting to write the dialogue, and then at some point, it was just like, oh, I gotta make sure these pages kind of flow. I can't just kind of say this is what it's gonna say. I gotta make sure there's a flow to it, type of deal. Which I mean, it led to. There was a later project that we worked on where he would like he wanted me to do dialogue for it, but the initial idea in my head was just like, oh my goodness, I hadn't thought about doing this sort of thing. And I think ultimately writing and even script writing, as you go along, it felt like he was getting harder. The same way I think Dave Chappelle was talking about doing the Chappelle show, where it's like, I don't got enough time in the day to come up with this stuff. Whereas ultimately in your head, you always want to do it, but you also want it to be good. And I think, maybe if you're doing it right and you just feel like it's all great, but I think kind of trying to say that these comic creators are backwards and they know that they had a good thing and they ran it into the ground type of deal. And now he's doing comic books and it's so easy to do. It's in my mind, we've seen the Image guys who are at the top of the line. There was already a ton of artist writers that proved that you could be a successful artist writer. You could come up with new titles and be successful, like characters you don't know, like he had I guess it'd go to the Alpha Flight that was successful. I would have to go to writers, but there was signs that you could be successful in doing your own thing. And then Image came along and said, hey, these guys need writers. So it's kind of, I know he kind of looks at the Image stuff in the late Marvel, the pre-Image X books and Spider-Man books is kind of the Marvel kind of figuring it out. I think he doesn't look at it. I don't know why he would say it. I understand he feels like it's easy, but I think that's a wrong way to look at it. If this comes easy for you and you feel like you're doing it right, that's fine. I'm okay with a writer coming in and feeling that. But I don't feel that you say, "Hey, it's easy," and they know it, so they should just be honest. So, would you chime in on your feeling of writing a comic book? It don't have to be the same lane with me, but just whatever your thoughts are of doing it in your experience on your own.
Well, I guess it started. Can you write? That is the big thing. I mean, I think about writing all the time, and most writers will tell you that the story doesn't start on the paper or on the screen. It starts in your mind, and it's getting created and crafted there. And a lot of times, the story is fully formed there before you even start penning anything at the end of the day. And do you have something to say, or you're just hacking something out? So, I mean, guys will be different, but I think for the majority of the writers, that's where you're at. Unless you're somebody who's getting paid, like with the writers striking now, where you're getting paid to produce stuff on a schedule. But most of the comic guys are not there. They actually get to write stuff that they're interested in, or that they've have their own, or they have ideas about, and they actually want to see this to fruition. The idea that I just can't imagine anybody saying that. The idea that it's easy. I mean, I've said this before. We're working with 7 different plot lines. That's pretty much what it is. People have responded to 7 different plot lines overall, and all we do is cosmetically change them, but they respond to them. So the whole, the quest, voyage and return, rebirth, those particular things. That's it. We just do them over and over again, and if you do them well, okay, you make certain you hit the right notes in the overall story. You can add your own touch to it. People tend to respond to it, and you have to see how many comics and how many things go out there that never get read, that people don't, that people have no idea even exist. I mean, look at the best-selling comic that you would have in this country, or the best-selling book that you would have in this country, and ask yourself, does anybody know who these people are?
Hmm.
Do they? But, so even with success, even with success at the end of the day, it's not easy. Now, film, the visual stuff, that usually tends to bring in more people. But the idea is, well, I think it's easy, so it must be easy, or I think this guy's an a-hole, so that's why it's easy. It's just not, that's just not it. Okay, sitting down, man, I'll give away a little. I'm actually working on like an analog story, like a character analog.
Mhm.
And, I had been saving this because I said, eventually, I'll get done with the day job and I'll have free time and I can start pitching around and so on and so forth. And I had been working on this and I said, you know what? This would be a great story for this particular character. And I'm going to put it to the side. And I said, whoa, 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 you're being stupid. If it's such a great story, why don't you just make an analog character and make that your own story?
Mhm.
Okay, and put that out that way. And then even then you put it down and you look at it, and I had to say, this might be the only story that I ever get published, that I can ever put the weight behind and actually get it done. Don't you want to tell a great story? If this is the only story that you ever get to do, that I think is great writing at the end of the day, when you can have that approach to it. But if it's if it's easy, okay, if it's easy, to be quite honest, it just wouldn't be what it is, right? It would not be what it is at this point. So again, for me, it comes across as a lot of the milieu that we have right now, and a lot of sour grapes and scat slinging, which these guys tend to be really good at. But to undercut the difficulties of writing, and not just writing, but I mean even the bad stuff most people can't do. Even the stuff you would look at for film writing, or for a book, or for a comic, even the stuff that I would chide some guy, oh man, this is hack work, the average person couldn't do it. Even the same guys who are being critical. So it's just, for me, it's just not there. And I think for most people, they'll say it's just not there. It's not an easy thing to pull off. And you got to separate the difficulties of craftsmanship, regardless of how high level or low level it may be, and the fact that this guy's just a jerk in person.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of painting. Well, no, I get it that the comic industry now is kind of not, is kind of trying to tailor its stuff to a certain audience and a certain appeal. And this is the outgrowth of the comics gate and that sort of thing. But I think some of the other guys that are feel that they're in comics gate, they're going through the basic thing of books that they want to do, which was ultimately a respectable reason to do Image comic books, but at the same time, they didn't really have the like. The hard part of it is if you examine the FF, and you think of it as a villain of the month or that sort of thing, the stories weren't necessarily that, right? It's not your straight, because someone was saying, hey, I think they're talking about Burns Run and saying there's the four types of ending. It's like, you also have to forget that. Look at the Fantastic Four. First issue, they fight the Mole Man, they get captured, they all this stuff. In the end, they don't defeat the Mole Man. They escape before it gets blown away. They come up with an angle on the scrolls to get out. The third and fourth issue are more the Human Torch, like showing how powerful he could be. In issue 5, the Submariner saves the day. So it's like the approach to comic books wasn't just, hey, we're gonna just defeat the villains, find a way to defeat the villains, similar to like the Batman TV show. They would like the FF are gonna get out alive. Sometimes they're gonna win, but sometimes they're just going to escape. And sometimes it's just going to be, they came up with doing totally different things. And they brought a lot to comic books to say, we don't have to have our character. When Spider-Man was a little more straightforward, when Spider-Man would find a way with his brain to defeat the villain type of deal, or get out of whatever thing that J. Jonah Jameson almost captured him in there. But that was a more straightforward. The Fantastic Four was just like, the Galactus story where they get this thing that to destroy the universe, but at the same time they have to give that back to Galactus, and then he leaves. It's just like it's they did basic storytelling, but the dynamics of what they were doing was very different, and different from the stuff they were already doing at Marvel, where everything else was very much straightforward, where the FF, sometimes they could beat, sometimes Infant Terrible gets picked up by his parents type of deal. So I think when you're looking at writing and you're looking at it and you look at people, the other side of comics, I guess it would be doing the frog, the cyber frog, whatever it is something that he got energy to do. Like with sitting around there, patting yourself on the back saying, it's easy, and these comic guys are acting like this is hard. When there's it took people a while to get trusted enough to be given these books, or to get a thing where Chris Claremont was a gopher, and he's on the writing side, right? But he's a gopher, he's hanging out, he's around Roy Thomas when he's doing the X-Men. He's around, Lee Win, he's doing the X-Men. And then they're like, all right, let's give it to him type of deal. But it's like, it's not just say, this is the easiest thing. And at the same time, he just tried to bring it forth as much energy as he could to the book. So, let's not look at it, in my mind, let's not look at it as easy going, because it's basically not movies, it's not film, it's not TV. And this is just 24 pages. You just need to figure out how to get from one page to the other. And it's like, let's be respectful to it, even if Marvel or DC is not my cup of tea at this day and age. It is a little more involved than just saying, hey, it's a comic book. Like, let's stop these people that are coming up being fans of Claremont and whoever else is writing, and we see these guys, we should be looking at you guys have tricked us. I think, who was it? No, who was it? Because I've been tough on Chris Claremont. I think Walter Simonson said it right. He's like, hey, the fans can't trust Chris Claremont. They don't know what's going to happen next issue. And that's what I kind of try to bring forth in what I'm doing. Try to surprise them from time to time. And that's something I can say is honestly, a good portion of what he did. He kept, for those 17 years, even if it was kind of like, oh, I'm shifting, I'm doing that, he kept it exciting and it kept it fun and dramatic and type of things. And sometimes involved, sometimes just a 180 flip, but it was always exciting. So that's the thing you got to remind yourself. And I don't think it's just that, but at the same time, I think that the success of the X-Men and the stuff he was bringing to it was a key part of it, understanding how to move the X-Men along, getting new villains to fight, and whatever was the trend was kind of factored it into the book, and it always kind of worked to a point where if something was successful in comic books, people couldn't wait for the X-Men to do something with it. Mercenaries are good. People just like I just eat it up. So, but that comes from Chris Claremont. That's not approach that Byrne would try to do, bring in the Marvel universe, but he kind of saw the classic X-Men book as a thing of the mutant struggle. So ultimately, I say all that to say is it's not that easy. I don't want to all the great people from Stan Lee, to Roger Stern, all the great writers at DC, LaGardner Fox, Jerry Siegel, the Otto Biden, like all these people that were coming forth, even if it was a Silver Age type of stories, some of the stuff that was in there, even if it's slapping the S on the animal or female or some other character or a messed up creation, like the involved part of the story, like how much story is in this bizarro story? Like, good lord, it's a simple premise of trying to create another Superboy, and it's like this story is not. It's like so extra involved. He goes in, everything he does, there's a mistake that happens, and they look at him as a bad guy. Superboy knows he's not a bad guy. It's like this is very involved writing. This is very involved stuff. So let's not just, yes, it's can be childlike, but at the same time, that didn't mean that they didn't put their all into it, man. It wasn't that easy. And if these guys with the Mort Wessinger, they get killed. But anyway, any last words?
That was a different thing. I mean, this is something I usually always push back on when people make these criticisms about the Silver Age being silly and childish. I'm like, they were selling the kids. They were selling the kids, and what the average age range was like 8 to 12. And here's the thing: as silly or as childish or sophomoric as they want to say that the comics were, or surreal or unrealistic, they were selling.
Yeah.
Okay, they were selling. They knew their audience, and they were selling. They were hitting those numbers all the time. You had comics selling 1 million copies during the Silver Age. Now comics have tacked older, supposedly more realistic, and you can't hit those numbers with grown people who have more discretionary income than the average kid ever did in those particular years. So I always put it to them: you got what you wanted. You got more realism. You got more grit. You got more dark, and you got less sales because you drove all the kids out of it. The kids, and they always like to say the same stuff. Well, look at manga. Look, manga's just beating comics. I mean, because all the kids are there. That's where you drove all the kids to. You decided, no, we're going to tack older, and you kept tacking older. You're tacking older. It's one thing if I've been reading comics for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, however long it may be, but there should be some kids like 14, 15, 8 coming in and saying, oh, yeah, I can enjoy this too. There was no sort of demarcation between, not even like with Star Comics. We're like, okay, great, you guys, we can get the kids into this, and then they can mature into this sort of thing right over here. Or even like the difference between Marvel and DC. No, it's all older. You got like people starting to read comics and they're college graduates. They've already had literature courses and they're reading them at the end of the day. So I always push back against that because the Silver Age, who was reading comics? Kids. They sold to kids. They were very successful to selling kids. They are not very successful at selling to adults. For some reason, they got to do all this gimmickry with variant covers and spec books and foil covers in order to get adults to plunk down $4 for a comic, which they still moan about. Where that much money for a comic book? They want Silver Age prices with adult story. Like, no, you're not getting it at the end of the day. You drove all the kids out, and you got to see the kids pick up these 2-inch thick manga books and read them, enjoy them, and go back. And it's like Silver Age. If you read those books, it's like Silver Age stuff wall to wall.
Yeah.
It's all the what is it? It's all the the proverbial nuttiness that you would have in a Lois Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane comic with a whole bunch of action. And they love it. And they love it. And you couldn't do that today in an American comic book. And these guys lifted liberally from the Silver Age because American comics came first. So it's for me, it's just off the wall that they don't homage that era. They don't homage that era at all. I can't even say it correctly. And without the Silver Age, you would not have superhero comics because most of these, with the exception of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, superhero comics weren't even there. They weren't even on life support. You had those three guys, and then you had the horror stuff, the war comics that was that were popular. Then you had the westerns, but without the Silver Age, that's what brought back superheroes. So again, the same way though, it's easy to write. Yeah, well, it's not easy to write, and hitting your target audience doesn't seem to be too easy either. For all the criticisms that I hear about the Silver Age.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When you bring that up, and I would only add that Stan was doing his thing, which was a reaction to what DC was doing. At the same time, he added in. He said in some later interview where there was a juvenile fiction novel where they kind of the writer was kind of talking to the reader, and that's how Stan got his style of kind of talking to the reader, like kind of like they were involved in the story type of deal when they weren't, and he kind of liked that. And that's one of the things where, writers to kind of channel in storytelling of stuff they read and kind of putting it into comic books. And I don't know that there's a better aspect to, to writing besides, becoming a prolific writer, being a big reader, like having a good volume of storytelling in your head, whether some of it be a little similar or closer to it, like having, with comic books at times, and I'm saying I'm not even just saying for my favorites, like even, like everything Kirby did as far as images that he kind of looked at, like he would kind of do the same image in there, to stories. It's just at times we need to know what stories there are, but Kirby was also reading too. So you can see that he's reading, you can see he's watching things. So my end of this is that it's not that easy. And if you feel that it's that simple and you're trying to go at a comic pros to kind of say that the jig is up, we finally know you kids out there, you can go out there and make, yes, you can. You can go out there and make your comic book, and maybe you can, I always go to I don't know. It's sad to say it. It feels like Jim Lee was the one who was pre-med. So obviously he's got a head on his shoulders, probably be the guy to write, oh, look at this X-Men stories that he kind of took over the plotting. These are pretty decent. These are decent X-Men stories. And then when you get to, I think, post Claremont, and it's like this Omega Red storyline is going a little too long. We don't really need this story. Hey, this Ghost Rider and Brood X-Men story, I don't even know about this one. It's like this one where they're at the side, the little pond near the X Mansion. I'm okay with this storyline. Oh, we're going back to a Mojo storyline. I don't even get this storyline, but the art is pretty good. So one of the things is that it's not that easy to kind of oust the writers, because you see that you're adding a lot to it. There's a lot of stuff that they add to it too. So that's about it. Go out there and don't look at comic books in the way of just heroes versus villains. Don't think of it the same way of heroes fighting each other either. Sometimes we got to go back to the old-fashioned story of doing old-fashioned type storylines. But you could do Silver Age storylines. You could do kind of stuff that Ling Wen was doing. You can do. I mean, it's tough because there's someone. If you read a book on, if you read those stories on Superman, and you read that, there's some bits as that are topical. I think that in the lines of dialogue that Jerry Siegel did relates to the time, but if you at least have enough history in your background, some of the lines that are said are things that you should know about. So it's like a little more involved than just Clark Kent going to this dinner with Lois and gets this insult. This insult is something that we should look up. And that's the part of having something where it's a little, that's not just, hey, here's Clark Kent goes to this thing and he's acting soft to show that he doesn't have powers to Lois. And then he gets smacked by Lois and she runs off. There's more subtext to it. There's a lot more to it. But we say this is the beginning. And, Jerry Siegel had that in his writing, even though it was for children. So I said all I said, even though it was ending, These guys are putting in work. That's the they're putting in work, and don't try to side guess it and turn it into, hey, it's easy as pie. So I respect these guys. So that's it. I know I added on a lot at the end. So if there's anything else you got, let me know.
We're out. We're out. We're out.
Okay, we out. Spin the rack out.
Out.